I locked up a guy this week.
You got a bankroll. They hold it like you got a job. This is your paycheck.
I'm a formerly incarcerated person. Spent quite a bit of my years confined in New York State prisons and facilities. And during this last stint, I actually served 33 years before my release in 2011. And I served 33 years, I mentioned that, but I had a sentence actually with a 15-year minimum. I was denied parole 9 times, as I said, because of something that was immutable, that would never change. I was denied parole because of the nature of my criminal offense. When I appeared before my first parole board in 1993, I had made major achievements during that 15-year period. I had actually obtained 4 college degrees, 2 of them master's degrees. I had been involved with creating rehabilitative programs behind the walls, most of which still exist today.
Fareed's story is not unique. He is a victim of a system of mass incarceration in which 1 in every 35 people in the United States is in prison on probation or on parole. That is the highest rate in the world. Of course, some are more likely to go to prison than others. If you are a black male, for instance, there is a 1 in 3 chance you will be imprisoned at some point in your lifetime. The other important part of this story is something called indeterminate sentencing, those without a definite number of years in prison. You could get 3 to 5 years, 10 to 20 years, or, like Fareed, 15 years to life. For many of those people, getting out of prison before their maximum has proven to be a daunting task.
So the notion of an indeterminate sentence was to assure that someone convicted of a crime would serve a specified period of time in prison for a felony crime, and that at the end of that period, he or she would become eligible for consideration of release. So who's going to handle whether or not a person gets released? We call it the parole board.
The parole board is
the nature of the crime. Welcome to the Gilchrist Experience. Today's guest, Jack Beck. Was it Community?
The Correctional Association
of New York. And of course, Victor Pate, Second Chance President at N.A.N, and my co-host, Graham Weatherspoon. Again, we're going into the prisons and find out the problems in the prisons. One of them is the parole boards and what type of people are on the parole boards. And these indeterminate sentences where 15 to life and they can turn you down, like this young man, 9 times. So he went up out of 15 to life, he spent 30 years. But during that time, the parole board was supposed to look at his advances and his rehabilitation, which is what prison is really supposed to be about, rehabilitating yourself. So this is a basic problem. The parole board doesn't look at the individual. And you have the task of going into the prisons and questioning what the corrections facility is doing to the prisoners. And they come to you with their complaints?
Yes, they do. Thank you. I really am so pleased to have this opportunity to talk to you about what's going on inside. And there are many things. And clearly one of the major issues for the people inside is getting out, which would be the natural thing that everybody is most concerned about. And the system right now is very unfair. Matter of fact, it's actually even counterproductive. The whole notion is the punishment they receive is their sentence, not what happens inside. What happens inside should be about preparing them for re-entering into society to be a more effective person, and when they get out, to stay out. The incentive with an indeterminate sentence is, you do well here, we will let you go. but the state is not living up to that bargain.
Okay.
And matter of fact, what they're really saying is that you do well and it doesn't matter. It's actually creating a disincentive for people to actually get engaged or do something and trying to change their life around, because they're saying to you, no matter what you do, the nature of the crime, which will never change, is the only thing we're going to look at. And we find this very frustrating. The Correctional Association of New York is 170 plus years old, and we have authority from the legislature to go into the prisons, examine what's going on, report to the legislature and the public about what we observe, and then to try to advocate to improve things that are not working.
Right, right.
And the parole system is not working. It's not working.
And what's the biggest problem?
Well, there are many problems inside. Parole is one of them. I think I would start out, number one is the treatment by staff. There's been a number of items in the press about brutality and abuse of the incarcerated population that is really rampant in the state and is finally getting the public attention that it hasn't had for a long time.
So they're glad to see you when you show up?
Generally they are, because we are saying to them, what happens to you matters.
Okay.
And really what, in most times, what incarceration about is really you're invisible. You are a number, you're an entity, but you're not really a person. And we're trying to recognize their humanity and also have the public realize that the fundamental existence of the human being is the potential for change and growth. Correction should be about facilitating that change, not thwarting it. And right now, incarceration is thwarting the growth of these people to really have an impact on them so they can live better lives. So we're concerned about violence and abuse. We are concerned about excessive solitary confinement, which I hope we can talk about.
Well, we've done a couple of shows on that with Victor.
We're also concerned about inadequate health care, the high number of people with mental illness that are incarcerated and the problems with caring for them.
How heavy is the mental illness? I mean, that should be one
Mental
of the main...
illness is...
Because being in prison drives you crazy right there.
Yes, but really it has to start, I have to say, a quick history that's very important. In the 1970s, we were having civil commitment of mentally ill people in these dungeons that were mental hospitals.
Okay.
And the public made a determination, we have to end this, we have to close the hospitals down.
Willowbrook was...
Yes, exactly. But the other part of that equation was we are going to create services in the community so that people could get it on the outside.
Okay.
But particularly in poor communities in New York and around the country, they never provided those services. And so what happened is people who are poor and mentally ill, the jails and prisons have become essentially their de facto mental health services. And so some people estimate as many as 30 to 40% of the people that are incarcerated actually have mental health needs. Just in New York, we have a little less than 53,000 people inside. There are 9,300 people that are on the mental health caseload, and we think that is 17, almost 18% of the population, and many more have actually had mental health needs in the community or elsewhere. We dump them into prison, and then it's very hard to provide services because imprisonment is really about disempowerment, control. And people who have mental illness are not really in a position to exercise that tremendous restraint that's required inside. Because what happens on the street, if you are not having a good day or you're a little grumpy, people just keep away from you. In prison, you violate the prison rules because you're not obeying an order. And what happens to you? You're sent into solitary confinement.
Did you know this young man, elder now, that was in there for 30 years? Did you know him?
I work with Fareed right now.
Okay.
Right now, I work with Fareed. He's a classic story of someone who really has turned their life around. And there are several parts of his story that is so interesting.
But the parole board turned him down 9 times.
Yes, they did. And they turned him down because of something that he could do nothing about. They did not look at the individual. They did not see who he was, who he had become, but they were reading a piece of paper about what happened a long time ago.
All right, Chief, let me run this other piece and then we go further into it. I just want to give you a little indication of the type of people that are on these parole boards. So run that second piece and we'll come right back at you. All right?
to maintain the system that we have, where the parole board just dismisses people because of what they originally did, then we create a system where people don't care if they change. There's no incentive to actually change their heart, change their mind, make plans to be positive members of their community, because it doesn't actually matter in the end, you know?
I had no training. When I came on the board, I was told by a colleague how to file my expense account. And I sat in one day at N.A.N, and the next week I was on my own.
But now you generally go to an office-type location and interview the inmate, for want of a better term, through video conferencing. With a video conferencing, it's like watching TV. It's passive. You know, you're looking back up, you know, like you watch a TV. Maybe if you're not doing the interview part of the thing, you might lose a little bit of attention. It's very passive, and it really doesn't get to what you're trying to determine: is that inmate or offender ready for community rehabilitation or reintegration?
I see the statistics of release online every month. They've gone down. I think in May they were at a 29% release rate for the initial candidates. They were woefully lacking when I was there, and it was at 50% something when I was there.
Ms. Treen's numbers are actually a little low. 20% of those appearing before the board for the first time are granted release, while only 15% of those reappearing are released. All in all, that's more than 10,000 denials every year. The Parole Reform Act passed in 1977 and implemented official guidelines for the Board of Parole to, quote, structure their use of discretion. These guidelines insisted that the board adopt a presumption in favor of release once someone had served their minimum term. A closer look at those guidelines, though, helps explain how the board's default today is still to deny, deny, deny.
There's supposed to be three factors, major factors that the parole board must consider by law. In New York State, it's Executive Law 259. First, they have to consider whether release at that particular time is incompatible with the welfare of society. Then they have to consider whether there is, if the person is released at that time, there is a reasonable probability, and I'm just reading from the statute here, that you would not live and remain at liberty without violating the law. And third, whether release at this time would so deprecate the nature of the instant offense as to undermine respect for the law.
Okay, so the guidelines are vague. There is no further explanation as to what might factor into determining someone's release would be incompatible with the welfare of society or would so deprecate the nature of the instant offense as to undermine respect for the law. But then further down the page, I found this. Quote, in its discretion, the parole board may revise or modify the guidelines in whole or in part.
It tells them to be basing the decision on the person's readiness to be released, and yet it also tells them that they can look at a bunch of criteria, which includes the nature of the crime, and they can weight any of those criteria any way they want.
It turns out that the
Beautiful.
Now, as we see by this video, are most of the people on the parole board middle-class whites? And judging, excuse me.
The parole board's calling you.
They heard you.
Some pesty. Excuse me. But, I mean, as we see from the video, it's quite, the people on the parole board have complete discretion.
Right.
And on some of the other pieces, like this one woman said she had no training. How do people get on the parole board? And who chooses? I mean,
well, you know, they are appointed. They often have a criminal justice background, particularly in terms of police or prosecutors. They are not, I would start out with the basic piece. They're making a judgment about a community, what that community is like, but they don't come from the communities from which people are going to return.
Okay.
They have no basis to really say what does this mean for the community and their reality. And essentially what they're doing is they are resentencing people.
Mm-hmm.
What's so disturbing about the process is that when the court sentenced someone and they have a minimum and a maximum, the minimum, to me, reflects what the court says, this is what the nature of your crime required.
Okay.
Because you can get out then. If it's really what the court knew about, that was your crime, and they're giving you a sentence. That's your minimum sentence. The maximum sentence is essentially the incentive to turn your life around and do something. The parole board seems to be taking the opposite. They
Well,
look
give
at
us,
it as
use this first guy. What was his name again?
Fareed.
Fareed. Use him as an example.
Well, he's a perfect example. He went in, he admitted that he had very little education, his life was in disarray when he came in, and he decided to apply himself. He applied himself in education.
Okay.
He applied himself in caring about other people inside. I know Fareed quite well, and I know many of people that were with him, and they said, he mentored me. He helped me change my life around. Yet when he goes to the board,
After 15 years.
after 15 years, they said none of that mattered. None of it mattered. Instead, what we're going to do is we're going to keep you in because of something that he cannot change. And so it's
The
without
nature of the crime.
the nature of the crime. And
So
so,
he spent an additional 15 years?
yeah, actually 17 years.
And just to add to what Jack is saying, right? These people that they have on the parole board have no sense at all about people's, lives, where they actually came from, what they did before they got to get where they are, nor do they have any sense of what they have done since they've been there, other than these pieces of paper that they arbitrarily read, and in most cases, they don't even read the file. So you go before the parole board, and you got these people sitting before you, and you sit down there, and they ask you a few questions, and all along, they really never even paid attention to anything that's in your file that gives credence or credit to the things that you have accomplished while you've been in there, or anything that you have done from the time that you came to improve yourself and the changes that you have made in yourself to prove that you are ready to return to society. So a lot of times, they're not even concerned about what you actually did, only because of the fact that they have a job, they sit there, they're supposed to render a decision, but they're not rendering a decision with any validity whatsoever. It's just a motion. It's just a procedure that they're going through.
You know,
Case in point.
Oh, God, I'm sorry.
Yeah, case in point, when you speak about the 259I and they got these guidelines saying, then down at the bottom they say, okay, yeah, well, never mind what this says, but in the bottom you can change it whenever you feel it's necessary. And it's ridiculous for them to say on one hand that these are the guidelines, the things that you're supposed to go by to judge a person's readiness to return to society, but then on the other hand, you turn around and say, well, you can just make any decisions you want, any way you want, twist it any way you want, apply it any way you want. This is just wrong. And this is one of the reasons why this parole system is broken and needs to be changed. There are things that need to be done. They need to change the makeup. They need to change the qualification of the people that are even allowed to be on this parole board. They need to be more caring people.
How do you change it?
Are the appointees there, are they placed there by the governor?
They are.
That how they're...
They're appointed by the governor?
Yes, that's my understanding.
Yes, they are.
And I actually want to add a point to what Victor was just saying. Recently, the department has instituted a program because actually this governor actually passed some additional regulations that suggested that you should be able to work yourself out and there should be some objective evaluation. And they started using something called the compass. It is an instrument to look at how dangerous you might be based upon a number of factors.
Right.
They started doing that maybe 2 or 3 years ago. And what we find repeatedly is people who show up with low risk on this objective instrument are still being denied parole. So when told this is what you should be doing, not that the law says they can do whatever they want, but clearly there are strong suggestions in the guidelines that they should be looking at risk assessment, they ignore it. And again, I can't say how lives. They go in there, they have worked so hard, they put together all the evidence they can to say, I'm a different person.
How much?
And then it says it doesn't matter.
Here's an open question. How much does racism play into this?
I think racism defines our criminal justice system.
Okay.
When you have 50% of the people that are incarcerated African American, 25% that are Latino, only 20% that are white, and then you look at what the population is, the system is racially biased from the day the police pick you up to the day you get inside. Once you are inside, what we find is there is further manifestations of racism inside. One of the examples is 50% of the people are African American, but if you go to solitary confinement, it's 60%. We find programs that are kind of the favored programs, and you'll see a much higher percentage of people that are white in those programs. And the porters and the menial jobs have a different racial breakdown. I go to a prison upstate New York where literally there is one black officer and there are thousands of African American men. How can you, and in that community is all white. So the only time that officer sees a black person, they're wearing green inside a prison.
Wow.
How could they have some sense of who these people are?
Wow. Right, right,
You know,
right. And what they see in the media.
What you've laid out here, it's a very clear continuation of the illness of our society.
Yes.
In the penal code, I was addressing the Supreme Court justices a few years back, and I said, what is section 5.00 of the penal code? And only one judge knew. See, we can hold people to the letter of the law. Robbery is 160.00, second degree robbery accompanied by another first degree with a weapon. We know that. But section 5.00, which is the first statute of the New York State Penal Code, says that the penal code is not to be strictly construed, but to be used for the fair deportment of justice. Meaning you don't have to hold people to the letter of the law, but use it to administer justice. Another thing people need to understand about law and state regulations is most of the time, a lot of times it can be very vague. Very vague. For instance, they'll say, with the stop and frisk issue, well, the guy looks suspicious. That's a matter of perception of who you are, where you come from, and where you are, and who you're observing. I heard a cop say in court once, in criminal court, well, the judge asked him, well, what brought this about? He said, well, the guy was looking at me menacingly. So there is so much vagueness in the law, and things are not delineated clearly. There is more gray than there is black and white, and this is where people are being lost in these gray areas. And it gives justification to the people who are in control to make whatever decision they want to make, while other people are languishing. And if 70% of the inmates in New York State, roughly 70%, come from New York City.
Not quite, actually. It's now down to a little under 50%.
Is that, how did they get it down that low? But let me finish my thought.
Well, please.
And if that's the case, the people sitting on the parole board, 50% of them need to come from New York City, where they know and understand the people that are there. And not conversely, but in addition, when you speak of mental health, and Kerry emptied out the mental institutions when he was governor, putting a lot of these people out on the streets. And the police officers themselves don't know how to interact with the mentally ill. And we've had people killed. Gideon Bush was shot to death in Borough Park. Another guy, I think Rosales, was shot on Tompkins Avenue near Fulton Street. He was naked, screaming on the ledge of a building, but he posed no threat to anybody, and they tased him and killed him. So the mentally ill are basically thrown to the dogs or thrown in prison because the police don't know how to deal with them, the correction officers don't know how to deal with them, they're not getting treatment. This is a major domino effect that is escalating to unbelievable proportions.
With the president going to the prisons, which is an eye-opener for everybody. Now, you watched the debates last night. Now, what do you think our future is? What do you think it holds for? Or how does your organization influence the change that's needed here?
Well, I want to step back a little bit and to really answer your question. I've been doing this work in New York for 34 years.
Ooh, wow. Yeah, that's a bunch.
I've been going up to the prisons that long. I've dealt with the New York City jails. And I'm just, so this is a personal observation. In those last 34 years, I've never seen a better time for the potential of change. And I think there is fundamentally because I think the public is starting to realize that the prison experiment we have done is a failure. Let me give you a little bit. 1971, New York State confined 12,500 people. By 81, it went up to 25,000. By 1999, it was 71,600 people inside of our prisons.
Wait. During the drug epidemic, we had a lower number of people incarcerated.
Well, the war on drugs drove up incarceration from 1981 to 1999. And then, so we were at 71,600. And then now we are a little under 53,000, 52,728 just 2 weeks ago.
Less marijuana arrests?
What it is that I think we have started to realize that the war on drugs is a failure and that incarceration doesn't work. During those years, from 1999 to now, we've reduced our incarceration by 26%, and crime has gone down.
Wow.
Crime has gone down. The prison system doesn't work because it's emphasizing what I call a paradigm of punishment. We have dealt with all issues. The mentally ill, we punish them. They're poor and they're mentally ill, we send them into prison. People have addiction problems. We punish them and send them into prison. And then prison exaggerates that punishment. Instead of treating people, they punish them, they lock them up in isolation.
Right.
And so what we see is that I believe the public is starting to realize that this experiment of mass incarceration, where we've gone up almost 400% across the country in the last 30-odd years, is not working, it's not effective, and they're ready to start to think about something different. And now it's incumbent upon those people that have been working very hard on this to say, we can demonstrate to you what is wrong, and there's ways to change. And those changes are, we have to reduce the number of people we put in, we have to get them out much sooner, and while they are inside, we have to use the R word, which is rehabilitation. What I rather say is treatment. Because that is effective, not because we're being soft on crime, we're being smart about how to change people's behavior.
We went over the Pell Grants that were being allowed in the prison, so you feel that that's one of the answers?
Absolutely. Education is the best tool to change people's lives around. Why do we mandate children go to school? Why do we have a system? And that's why last night on the debates, I want to kind of pull the full circle. I've been watching, because I've been involved in criminal justice for, like I say, almost 40 years, because before I came to New York, I was doing it. You would never hear in a presidential debate criminal justice issues, except it was tough on crime, and that was in the 80s and 90s. Last night, everyone was talking about we have responsibility, particularly to African-American men that are inside. We have to change that system. We have to get away from mass incarceration. Even Hillary said, we understand that there's an opportunity. This is an issue that everyone is agreeing we have to change. And so we have to exploit that so it doesn't become some marginal little piece, but it deals with the issues that you've talked about. The racism inside the system. And also, how are you going to address people that have greater needs? You can't just say to the mentally ill, do a better job, don't provide you any services. You can't say to someone that has a substance abuse problem, oh, just get better. You have to provide services to them, but if you do that, their lives will be better. And what's most important, every person that's inside has a family on the outside. Many of them have children. They have loved ones. When you change their lives, you change the lives of the people in the community. And I think there's an opportunity to make that change now.
When an inmate goes in, and probably Victor, you can speak to this, you go in, you go through intake, and before you're ultimately sent wherever you're being sent, various tests are done. Do they do psychological exams? Do they do anything to assess an inmate coming in to determine? Because there are people who are failed in the courtroom because their lawyers are no good. There are people who are failed because the lawyer's not even qualified to handle that type of trial. So they have been failed before they can get to trial, and ultimately you know what the end result will be. So if a person has a mental deficiency, is that determined? Is that assessed upon coming into the system?
Well, let me speak to the question that you asked, and I know that when I was going in and out, they did what they would consider a mental health evaluation, where they would ask you a few questions. Have you ever thought about committing suicide? Are you taking any type of medications? Yada yada yada. But it wasn't any real comprehensive psychological evaluation that was done to really determine if you actually needed any psychological service, or even if you even came in with one. So thereby, when you were placed in population, I remember being on Rackham Island early in the days, and there was a mixture of all kinds of types of people walking around in the cell block, looking up at the walls, pacing around in their cells. So their sense of psychological evaluations were not being done in any effective way at the time, other than asking you a few questions. So that means that I could be in a cell with you, and you could be 730, and 730 was a person with psychological disorders and stuff, right? And I don't know I don't know you, you don't know me, but I see you walking around talking to yourself, and it was just a thing where everybody was lumped together, so there was no any real meaningful psychological evaluation done. Now they have gotten a little bit more better, that they do this at the point of intake when you're coming in, doing at the point of arrest, at the precinct, you know what I'm saying? There's usually some psychological person, whatever their title is, to do the interview.
The point that it's profitable to have prisons?
Of course it is.
Corporations are investing in prisons.
Yeah, if you're talking...
So as long as you have it being profitable, how do you change it?
Well, if I could just expand on your mental health issue, because we have spent a lot of time at the Correctional Association, in particular looking at the mentally ill inside. And there's a few basic things that I think it's important to understand.
Even more so with the mental part, you get more money, don't you?
Not really. First of all, I think the money that's there, first of all, New York State doesn't have any prisons that are that are private. They do not do that. The money
New York doesn't
here
have any private prisons?
No, they do not in the state prison system. What you do have, though, is a very powerful union that is concerned about jobs. And any union, of course, is going to be concerned about their members and their jobs. And so when we did, and it's actually during Cuomo, we built all these prisons upstate. These are in communities where the industry is prisons.
Right.
I literally, at one of the more famous ones, is Clinton Correctional Facility. I was there in the mid-2000s, and I was meeting with a lot of the staff. And I asked them about, this sense of what is their community like and what is important to them. And they'd say, the best part of this job is that I'm working with people I know. And then one man raised his hand and he said, when I graduated from high school, 30% of my graduating class went to work in the prisons. We have created an industry that these communities are dependent upon. Fortunately, the current governor did say we shouldn't use prisons as a job growth and employment system. And that was one of the best things he did in his State of the State a few years ago. But I want to get back to the mentally ill, because I think there's a couple of really important points that really shows how we're failing the system. We have all these people that are inside, whether it's 20%, whether it's 30%. We have, inside the New York State prisons, they have 9,300 on, this is the one area where OMH, the Office of Mental Health, are actually providing the mental health services. And there are only 1,200 residential mental health beds. That means places, even though it's still in prison, at least they are receiving more intense mental health services. The other 8,000 are out in general population, exactly what you talked about, where people talk about this. These people, we were at a prison, Collins, which is in Western New York. It's a medium security prison. Within 3 years, they decided we're going to raise its mental health status. Half of the population were on the OMH caseload. They didn't do massive training to staff. They didn't change programs. We just dump the people that have mental health needs, and we have them in general population where, by the way, they never run group programs. They might see a counselor once a month for 10 or 15 minutes. It's a tragedy. And then what happens, and this is the problem, we passed a law called the shoe exclusion law that says people with seriously mental illness cannot be placed in isolation because it's a tragedy, and I can talk about it.
Yeah.
However, I've been tracking this very carefully. All of a sudden, after that law was passed, people that are schizophrenic by their diagnosis dropped by almost 30 or 40%, and they were given other diagnoses that would not give them the right to get these services. So whenever you draw a line where we're going to provide services, all of a sudden we're going to change the game. Because there's no oversight. Because if they had that diagnosis, if they went into disciplinary confinement, they had to get transferred to this high-intense unit, which under the law mandated 4 hours every day of out-of-cell services. They don't do that. So now we have 4,100 people still in disciplinary confinement. More than 700 are on the OMH caseload. We're still using discipline inside as a dumping ground for the mentally ill. And I just want to tell one story to me that shows about the problem of prison and mental illness. In 2005, I was at Attica, one of the most infamous prisons. And they, because of litigation and other things, had created a unit inside of disciplinary confinement where people could be brought out and placed in a cage, 5 people in a cage, where they would see a therapist.
Wait, in a cage?
In a cage,
That's
like
not
a phone
even...
booth. And that's the therapist is there, and they're all in these 5 cages so that they
Group
said because
therapy.
of security staff wouldn't be there. And I met this man, and he had scars up and down all of his arms and on his face. And I talked to him, and he said, I have been in solitary confinement for 7 years. I have been to the psychiatric hospital while in prison 17 times, and finally now, in the last 2 months, they finally put me into this program. And I said, please, and he said, I cut myself, it's one of my problems. He was very tragic, but he said, at least now, maybe I can get some help. I lost track of him in all this. I was at one of these new residential mental health treatment units that's still for disciplinary inmates. I was there last year. We're interviewing all this. This man comes down and sits down with me. It is now 8 years later. They still have him in an isolated environment. They're still not really treating him. They're attempting to treat him. And he told me this story. And this is the whole thing about punishment. He is a person who hurts himself. And so he wears glasses. And just a few weeks before I was there, he took off his glasses and he broke off the one arm because there was a little metal piece. And he's sitting there and he's struggling. And he says, he goes to the CO, the correctional officer, and says, no, I'm not going to hurt myself. I'm going to turn this in. They turned around and gave him a disciplinary ticket for having a weapon when he was trying to help himself. And this is the model where punishment is always the way to respond rather than empathy, compassion, and treatment. To recognize that people are trying to change. And this was in the best unit that I know of. But they still, when you see you have a constant conflict between health people, healthcare individuals and mental health that are trying to empower the individual to take control of their lives, and a correctional system that only has one tool. We're going to punish you, we're going to control you by punishment. And so, to me, that was a tragic story. This person is now almost 15 years in CHU. He is eventually going to get out. And
in what condition?
And in what condition? And how is he going to be able to...
If he's a threat to himself, then he's a threat to the community. He's not eligible for parole.
Yeah.
And
Where
this
do
is
you
the
see
reason
the
they
hope
use.
coming from?
The hope is that, and actually I'm going to make even a broader piece. When I said earlier that people are starting to think that the system is not working and they're ready for change, I actually would make a broader piece that actually the Affordable Care Act, Obamacare, actually is trying to say something fundamental.
Whoa.
We need to treat people rather than do something else.
Obamacare.
Obamacare. Obamacare is saying we need to have behavioral health services. That means substance abuse treatment and mental health services in the community. We don't need to put these people in prison. We need to provide them services in the community before they get there. And I think it is creating the sense, even California a few years ago, they said, where they had very little substance abuse treatment, would you be interested in diverting money to substance abuse treatment? Overwhelmingly, the public said yes. And so my notion is, what we have to change mass incarceration, we have to change the paradigm, which says we're not going to deal with every social ill by locking people up, but rather treating them. And if we can do that inside of the prisons, we can do that in the community, and we can substantially change the number of people that are incarcerated.
You see Bernie Sanders becoming president and changing some of this stuff?
Well, I don't know. I certainly loved his statement about
Well,
last
how
night.
about Hillary president and Bernie Sanders vice president?
I don't think Hillary's going to make it.
Well, I think what is needed, though, is, and I don't want to get too off on politics, my notion is, I watched that debate last night, and then I watched the Republican debate, and you think we were talking about different countries.
Right.
It's like there was real substance about things that need to be changed,
Right.
and people that want to do that. I don't necessarily agree. I'd probably be more radical in terms of the solutions that I would want, but at least there are some politicians saying, we have to do something different. And in the criminal justice area, there are many politicians that are doing that. Now, they're doing it because they want to save money. But the reality is, right now, the criminal justice system is not providing us with safety. It doesn't work. When you don't treat people inside, make them better citizens, and give them the tools so they can survive, they come out and they go back to prison. And all the community and families are hurt by that. If you want real safety, you have to deal with the people that are inside and give them the tools so that they can have a productive life, and we all benefit from that.
Okay. I want to play this last piece, and then we'll come back, and I'd like to hear from you. How would you change if you were governor?
Okay.
All right?
Jack
All
for
right, let's
governor.
play this last piece, and we'll get a little taste of what happens to some of these prisons and when the parole board reacts contrary to what they really deserve. Let's play the last piece.
It becomes a situation where the person making the decision is saying, on some level, maybe not even consciously, but on some level, well, that's bad. That person is bad. That person doesn't deserve a second chance because of the stigma. There is a stigma that says, that categorizes people, that says once a criminal, always a criminal. Once you've offended, you'll always offend. So that it feeds that, it feeds the decision of parole decisions. And what it also does is it makes it okay to keep denying people. Because if society says that population is generally undeserving, who cares? Who cares?
They don't look at the good things that you accomplish as well. You're a felon. So even when you're in there, you're still labeled as a felon, you dangerous, you manipulative, you everything that's evil and bad. So it's very scary.
The women who were inmates, men always felt, male commissioners, that they were being manipulated. That if somebody looked too together, it was feminine wiles. That if somebody looked frazzled, she was going to go out there and pick the wrong guy to lead her around, and she was not a good risk. There was always some way. I remember sitting on a board once working with somebody, and he said to me afterward, "Did you notice her lipstick and her nail polish were the same color?" Wow, wow. Well, he denied her for reasons that he went into to say what that spoke to him about.
I look at it as having a society that generally doesn't think about these issues, that has no direct tie to these issues, so that they need to be informed. They need to hear the stories of people who are, at the end of the day, human beings. The costs of keeping people incarcerated for much longer than they need to be in prison. There is the economic cost, no question. You talk about someone who deserves to go home. If they're under 50, in New York State, it's going to cost another $60,000. If they're over 50, it's going to cost like $128,000. So there's that cost. But the cost to society is even greater. The cost to each and every one of us. When you talk about denying parole to people who have shown that they have earned that opportunity, you're not talking just about the individual. You're talking about someone who is a mother or a father, who is a potential taxpayer, who is a potential leader, someone who could make a difference.
It's my motivation. So this is what keeps me, you know, doing what I'm doing. Because someone got to teach them. As time, Brandon as well, Oneida. So that's my basic format. We need fathers out here. I know he's showing me his boo-boo. He got poked up by the doctor. So you know they can come to daddy like, daddy, he hit me with one. He hit me in this, and that's the pleasure right there. You know. So another thing is, it's a lot of black fathers out there, and I'm gonna speak to y'all because we go through a lot. Keep on going through what you're going through.
It's right here.
Because the future will be bright. Don't give up and don't leave.
And certainly.
I played that piece, so we played that once before. We're always forgetting about the families that are behind and how many black fathers are up in prison. We all call it planned genocide, really, because this is directed, to stop and frisk, or just through this war on drugs through so many young black men in prison. And you're telling us that there's some hope now. I'd like to go further on what would you do as governor?
Well, I think there's many things that could go on from the governor's standpoint.
Okay.
First of all, on the parole issue, there is legislation right now called the Safe Parole Act that would substantially change the criteria and used where you could not rely on the nature of the crime, but you'd have to look at other objective factors, make assessments, and let people out.
Okay.
That is a step. But to have that effective, you're going to have a parole board that represents the people who they're judging.
Okay.
Not a very, where the people that, the communities from which they are going to, and the ones that they're making assessment for, and the risks that they're talking about, they have to come from those communities. Second is, you also have to say as a governor, there's real leadership that is needed. Part of the problem with the parole board is that if you say, I want zero risk in your decision making, then you can keep everybody locked in.
Yeah.
You have to, all human endeavors involves a risk. I don't know what I'm going to do tomorrow, but I can never predict what you are going to do, absolutely.
Right.
And so we have to say it is okay if you have done your job. You've made a fair assessment. If bad things happen, that is part of the risk, because so many good things will happen when I let that individual out, they reunite with their family. That man with his children is very powerful. Those children, without that, are losing something.
Right.
And so we have to be able to take that risk. There's other things that need to be done, though. What we have to do is have real leadership on, we have to change our sentencing laws. We have to get away. If you go to Europe and you look at that criminal justice system, it's entirely different than our system. They incarcerate far fewer people. They do it for a much shorter period of time. And inside the prisons, and this is what I get to, they don't have security staff that are just security staff. If you go to somebody that does security, they're saying, well, I'm a teacher, but I also maintain security. In other words, they view their job as defined not by controlling an individual, but by helping an individual. And that's not soft, that is effective. And so he needs to really change what we call the paradigm of what prison is about. And so I just want to kind of get to this is, right now we're going through a crisis about violence inside of our prisons. And there's a few points.
Right.
You know, the terrible situation that had Clinton when 2 people escaped. That was really related to, malfeasance by staff. Yes, they escaped. By the way, they also had very, very long sentences where there's, you create the incentive to want to get out. I'm not excusing their behavior, but I'm saying they went out, but it was problems with staff. Following that, several things have happened that are really sad. People are who had nothing to do with the escape. They have found no evidence that any other person helped them other than staff. Yet they have been brutalizing people inside. literally putting plastic bags over people's heads to interrogate them.
Because of this escape?
Because of the escape.
So this is Abu Ghraib all over again.
Yes, it is.
And they had nothing to do with it.
They had nothing, and people got transferred and sent into, they were in honor blocks. These were people that were not doing the other
And they took that away.
And they took that away, and they sent them to actually isolation with no charges. But even more so, we have this response of punitiveness, so that just before the escape, there were 3,600 people in disciplinary confinement. There are now 4,100, 500 new people, not because they were in Clinton, but the system reacts of, oh, they have done something wrong, and everyone in green, that's the uniform they wear, is being punished. He has to create an environment as a government. We are not going to use punishment as our only tool. No, we are going to have to do something much more radical. We have to shrink the population that's inside, shorten those sentences, and reinvest in those people so that we can be safer. That takes a lot of leadership. That is not going to be easy to do.
How much does the governor listen to what you have to suggest? How effective are you in getting these ideas across?
Well, the Correctional Association has been out there a long time. We do meet with people from the executive, we meet with people who work in the department, we meet a lot with the legislature, and we're out in the public.
Do they listen?
Some people listen. There are clearly advocates for the, I don't mean advocates, I mean people inside of government who know what I'm saying.
Okay.
Many people know this, but it's going to take, I'm actually going to do a Bernie Sanders. It's going to take a community demanding this to change that structure. It's going to have to be New York City people and the communities from which they come to say, we have to change what's happening.
We've had so many people. Look at so many guys have been arrested on parole. Guys have been out for a week or 2 weeks and they wind up killing somebody.
You know, that is, if you took every example of a failure and then said, people have a heart attack, they were on medication. Many people are saved, but it didn't work for one person. Do you throw away the medication? No.
Okay.
What you say is, there is no perfect system that's going to guarantee success in every case. You have to be objective about evaluating your system and say, is this working? And I can guarantee that if we implemented programs that treat people with respect and educate them, we will be a safer society, because there's tons of evidence that show that.
How many people are on the state parole board? Do you know?
We're actually down.
19.
I don't know the
19?
number of people, but I believe there are some openings that could be filled. I think it's very important that we try to change that. But the parole board is only a step in a much bigger system of saying we have to reinvent our criminal justice system to really be effective by being fair, humane, and productive. And right now it's inhumane when we're locking people out. It's very unfair. There's all racism and everything. And ultimately it's not effective. It's not making us safer. It actually is making us less safe.
Well, you're saying the parole board comes from the community that's upstate.
That's right.
So how do you get people from city where most of the criminals come from, or you said 50% now? Well, how do you get the community down here to be associated with the parole boards upstate?
Well, there are many, actually, coalitions around the state that are really trying to address this issue. We're part of several of them. There's a coalition campaign for alternatives to isolated confinement that's looking at that. There's another one, a coalition we're calling Beyond Attica, which what we're trying to say is Attica is a prison that has been an utter failure, where there's brutality and violence.
Okay.
We think it should be closed, and actually we've heard people inside the system that thinks it should be closed, but we have to go beyond Attica to change this punishment paradigm.
You've been trying to do that since '71, right?
Yeah, and
well, they haven't
now,
had a real coalition that was really addressing Attica per se, but I think now, as my colleague Jack pointed out, that the climate is right. We do really need the people. There needs to be public education. People need to pay attention to what's going on, and they need to really become a part of these campaigns that are pushing for these changes in the criminal justice system, especially with the parole board, because the parole board is a gateway to people having access to other services, as Jack pointed out, especially with education. But more importantly is that there are, Jack and I both are a member of, I think, more than several campaigns that are part of criminal justice reform. And there are some really, really good things going on with these campaigns, and we're gaining some ground on a lot of things. We need the community to be educated. We need people to become involved. We need people to become concerned about what's going on in prison with the prisoners, their loved ones, things of that nature there. And once people start becoming aware and start raising their voices and start telling our legislators that we ain't going to stand for this no more, and we're going to stop paying your salary because we're not going to let you go back to office next election. Once we take a stand and demand that the people, we will not allow this to continue to happen, that will push our legislators to change these laws. But it's up to we the people to make this known that we will not stand idly by while you keep people in prison for long periods of time past the period of time that they were sentenced, while you keep people in prison to the point where they are dying or almost dead, when you continuously not to give people the appropriate health care that they need, when you continuously deny people the mental health services that they need, when you continuously allow the prisons to abuse people and you expect them to come out to act better, then it is up to we the people to make this change, as Jack pointed out. It's up to we the people. That's how we change the parole board. That's how we change the people on the parole board, because it's us, we the people, that have to do that.
And if I could emphasize one thing, that he is being, you might not know, that Victor on Saturday is going to be getting an award as a leader in the criminal justice field.
Okay.
And what we really have to do is, there are many victors out there that I have met who are formerly incarcerated who can really lead this change. We have to convince the public that these people that they see as other are really us.
Amen.
And that the way you do that is make sure they are given leadership positions. At the Correctional Association, we're definitely trying to do that, expand that, and we need this leadership to be from the people that are most directly affected, the people that are inside, the family members, the women that are going upstate to these men's prisons for 20 years, keeping contact with their family members, going through all-night bus trips to be disrespected in the visiting room. We need them to come forward and say, I demand a change. I am a person, I deserve respect and from you and fairness. And so we want to have this leadership from people like Victor.
All right. Gentlemen, it's been a pleasure. As usual, Victor brings this attention, this intention.
Jack for governor.
And really, thank you for coming today, Jack.
It was a pleasure.
We're running out of time. But we must do this again, and I'd like to really see who you're going to bring back with you. And it's great to see you have hope after 34 years, to see a change here. Because we see the problem, and it's all around us. And we really, truly have to be our brother's keeper. And Victor, again, I compliment you on your steadfast heaviness and keeping us sane through all this madness.
Thank you.
Again, thank you for coming to the Gilchrist Experience. And the God in me loves the God in you. And remember, we have to stay sane and be your brother's keeper. God be with you. Amen.
Thank you.
Good segment.
All right.
All right.